Hello everyone, this is Miss Cave with a video lesson on multi-step inequalities. The SOL for this is 8.18, Virginia SOL 8.18, which is solving, graphing, and writing multi-step inequalities. So you should have your foldable, and you should fold the part on top that has the different types of problems that we're going to be going over in class today. So let's go ahead and get started with variables on the same side. So we're going to look at these examples together and you're going to copy them in your notebooks. So for the first problem, we solve inequalities just like we solve equations. So we're going to start here. We're going to put a line down the middle. And we're first going to combine any variables that are the same. So we're going to look for things that are the same. So we have 8x and we have negative 6x. We can put those together. We can combine our like terms. So 8x minus 6x is what? 2x. So now we have 2x minus 5 is greater than 9. So now we simply have a two-step inequality. So what we're doing with an inequality is we're trying to get the variable by itself. So we're trying to get x alone, just like we do with the equations. So what do I do to both sides now? Add 5. So I'm going to add 5 to both sides of the inequality. This cancels out. I bring down my 2x. So 2x is greater than 14. I divide both sides by 2. And x is going to be equal to or greater than 7. That's how we solve a two-step or multi-step inequality. We also need to graph these. So I do want to write a graph on here. So we're going to graph our inequality like so. So we have 7, we have 6, we have 7, and we have 8. Is this an open or a closed circle? Open. And is it going to go to the right or the left? It's going to go to the right because it's answers that are greater than positive 7. So we combined like terms and then we solve the two-step inequality. Let's look at the second one. How is the second one different from the first? What do we have this time? Julia. Yeah, we have a different sign and we have parentheses. So our first step when we have the parentheses is to get rid of the parentheses. So we're going to use the distributive property to get rid of the parentheses. So I'm going to go ahead and distribute 6x plus, and then I'm going to multiply 6 times 2, which is 12, plus 1 is less than or equal to negative 17. So we've distributed, we've gotten rid of our parentheses. Now we're going to combine our like terms. So 6x, I have 12, and I have 1 on the left side. Is there anything for me to combine with 6x? No. Is there anything else we can combine? The 12 and the 1. So we can combine our whole numbers. So we get 6x plus 13 is less than or equal to negative 17. So now we have a two-step inequality. So we're going to subtract 13 from both sides. We're trying to isolate our variable. We're going to subtract 13. When I do that, this cancels out. I get 6x is less than or equal to negative 30. I divide both sides by 6. And x is less than or equal to negative 5. Because negative 30 divided by 6 is negative 5. Now notice that we didn't flip the inequality sign. Why didn't we flip the inequality sign? Lana? Because we didn't divide by a negative. If we divide by a negative, we would have to flip the sign, but we didn't. We divided a negative by a positive, but we didn't divide both sides by a negative. So for this one, I'll go ahead and graph it over here. So I'm going to graph it like so. And then -5, -6, -4. And this is going to be a closed circle. And it's going to be less than, so it's going to be to the left. Questions on that one? Okay, let's look at the third one. Now the third one, you notice, doesn't have any parentheses, but we do have terms that we can combine. So I'm going to go ahead and look at that. I have my 4x, and I'm going to put a box around that minus sign too, because that indicates a -9x. Are you writing all of this down? So the first thing I'm going to do is to combine those like terms. 4x and -9x is what? -5x. Good. So it's -5x. And then I'm going to combine my +8 and my +2. So that's going to be plus what? 10. And then all of that is less than -5. So you could probably see now, do you guys see what's going to happen with this inequality as we solve it? What's going to happen to our sign? We're going to what? It's going to flip. How do we know it's going to flip? Because we're going to end up dividing by a negative because the coefficient in front of x is a -5. Okay, so let's keep going. We're going to subtract 10 from both sides. When we subtract 10 on the left, it goes away. So we're going to bring down our -5x less than -5 minus 10 is -15. And now we're going to divide both sides by what? -5. We're dividing by a negative. So we're going to highlight that. What happens when we divide by a negative? You have to flip your sign. So we're going to flip it from a greater than, or excuse me, less than to a greater than sign. So your answer is going to be x is actually greater than +3. And we had to flip. I'm going to write that in my notes so I remember I have to flip whenever I multiply or divide by a negative. Now to graph this, I'm going to draw my number line over here. I'm going to put 3 in the middle, 4 to the right, 2 to the left. Is this an open or a closed circle if it's greater than 3? It's going to be open to indicate that it can't be 3, but it's going to be anything greater than 3. So before we continue to the ones where we have variables on both sides, where there's more steps involved, let's look down at the bottom of your sheet. That includes the steps that you're going to follow when solving and graphing multi-step inequalities. So number 1 says use the blank blank to remove any grouping symbol. So basically, how do we get rid of the parentheses? What do we use? What is that called? The distributive property. So we're always going to do that first. So write distributive property. So that's our first step, is to use the distributive property. Okay, our second step is to blank, blank, blank. What do you think goes there? What do we do after we get rid of the parentheses? Lana? Combine like terms. Very good. So the second step is to combine like terms if you have them. And you do that on each side of the inequality. Sometimes you have them on both sides. The examples we looked at so far are only on one side. Okay, and then if I have variables on both sides, I'm going to move the variables to one side of the equation. I don't want to have them on both. That's what we're going to look at for the next part of the notes. Okay? And then number 4 is just solve it using inverse operations to solve the two-step inequality. And then very important, don't forget to switch the inequality symbol when you're multiplying or dividing by a negative, just like the number 3 that we just did. Okay, so we're going to go move back up in our notes now so that we can solve the more difficult ones that have variables on both sides. Okay, so this one's different. Number 4 is different because I now have variables on both sides. So if you remember our steps when solving these problems, our first thing is to use the distributive property. Do I have any parentheses? No. Our second step is to combine any variables on one side. Do I have any that I can combine? No, because I have variables on both sides. I cannot combine them. I can recognize, that I have things here that are the same, but remember, you can't just combine them across. You can only combine them if they're on the same side. So what I need to do is to get them on the same side. So for this one, I'm going to subtract 4x from both sides. I'm going to subtract 4x from both sides and then see what I have. When I subtract 4x from 13x, I get 9x. I bring down my minus 8. I bring down my greater than or equal to sign. And what about my 4x minus 4x? What's happened there? It's 0 now. It goes away. And then I got to bring down my negative 26. Remember that you're subtracting 26 when you had the 4x. So when the 4x goes away, you still have a negative 26. And so now that brings us to our last step, which is just to use inverse operations to solve. So I'm going to add 8 to both sides. This cancels out. I get 9x is greater than or equal to negative 18. I'm going to divide both sides by 9. And then x is greater than or equal to what? Negative 2. So it's just like equations, ladies. The only difference is we have to flip the sign sometimes and then we graph them differently. So we're going to go ahead and do our graph. So I'm going to draw my graph up here. I'm going to put my negative 2 here, negative 1 here, negative 3 here. Is this an open or a closed circle? Closed. Is it going to go to the right or the left? The right. Okay. Number 5. Okay. This time I have to use the distributive property first because we have parentheses. So I'm going to rewrite my inequality. Negative 8x, right? Negative 8 times x. And then it's negative 8 times negative 2. So this is actually going to be plus 16. Do you guys see that? Because it's negative 8 times negative 2 because I'm subtracting 2. Now I have variables on both sides. I'm going to add 5x to both sides. When I do that, this cancels out. The negative 5x and the positive 5x. I have negative 11 is less than negative 3x, because negative 8x plus 5x is negative 3x plus 16. Now I have a two-step inequality. I'm trying to isolate my variable. I'm going to subtract 16 from the right side as well as the left. Negative 11 minus 16 is negative 27. Negative 27 is less than negative 3x. I divide both sides by what? Negative 3. Negative 3. And when I divide by a negative, what happens to my inequality sign? It switches. It flips. I'm dividing by a negative. So now I have, sorry, I'm going to squeeze over here. I have 9 is greater than x. I flipped my sign. If 9 is greater than x, that means x is what? Is less than 9, and that's my answer. X is less than 9. So to graph this, I'm going to draw my graph. Tried to make that blue. No, blue. And I'm going to put 9, 10, 8, open or close circle? Open to the left. So a couple of things there. I had to flip the sign, but then I had to rewrite it so that the variable was on the right so that I could graph it. So you guys have 5 examples for tonight. You can either watch the video if you like or just look at your notes, but I want you to finish by doing example number 6 for practice so that we can do a partner practice tomorrow. And that's it for writing and solving and graphing multi-step inequalities.